let's take one issue just to kick off the conversation, which in a sense underpins the ability of a government to do anything in terms of spending money, and that is the funding formula that levers money in to the Holyrood Parliament, and that in part is governed by the Barnet Formula. Nigel Farage thinks that should be revisited. Do you?
I think it should be revisited. It's a 50-year outdated system that has to be looked at. Now, I think that when it is looked at, that could result in more money to Scotland. I think there's an opportunity there. But the point that I'm getting at, and I know we'll speak more about specific policy, Bernard, but I've been very open with journalists and other people over the past few months that reform does not have a full policy manifesto there yet. We have to have that for next year.
Let's be clear. What's wrong with the Barnett Formula?
Well, right now it's 50 years outdated. I think it's right that when something has been there for as long as it has to be reviewed and re-looked at. I think that that's only fair.
Okay, do you support, for example, a funding formula which is a needs-based formula rather than a population-based formula, which Barnet is?
Well, I think looking at a system where you have the Scottish Government raise more of its own money, I think is a way of looking at things. So we've spoke about having more investment in the North East and in the North Sea. We would get rid of net zero to make sure there's more investment in there from business. That would then go into the Holyrood coffers. So I think it has to be more based on looking at the system as a whole and trying to make sure that Scotland grows. So I get the point. I think what I'm saying is it has to be reviewed properly, but this is a 2029 issue, it's not a 2026 issue.
Well, the direction of travel in this in terms of what your party thinks is quite important, because Nigel Farage has form in this. For example, when he was leader of UKIP, the policy was that Barnet should be scrapped. Now, the problem with scrapping Barnet, and we know that that's what Nigel Farage thinks, because we could go through quote after quote after quote where he says he wants to end this formula. If the formula is to end with nothing in place, it would it not be catastrophic for the provision of public services in Scotland?
If it ended in a cliff edge the way in which you're describing, Bernard, absolutely. But what Nigel said when he was up last week was it had to be reviewed. If Nigel Farage is Prime Minister, he's not going to end the Barnett Formula in a click of fingers. What he said he will do is review the system to find up a system that makes it fairer. I think when that system's re-looked at, Scotland could get more beneficial, but that has to be looked at when Nigel's Prime Minister. It's not a cliff edge. As soon as Nigel's Prime Minister, the Barnett consequentials end. That's not the case at all. He said last week very clearly it would be a review.
OK, we're jumping over many electoral hurdles here because you've already installed them into 10 Downing Street. But of course, if that was ever to pass, one of the things that your website does say, for example, is that within the first 100 days of a Reform UK government, the personal allowance, which is the amount of money that a taxpayer can earn, which is not subject to tax, should currently go from £12,500 a year to £20,000 a year. What would that cost?
I don't have the figure entirely in front of me now, Bernard, but what we have put out is that we have
Can I tell you what the Institute for Fiscal Studies say, because they're perhaps more instructive in this than I am. They say that in order to raise that, and in your website, it says that the Reform UK government will introduce this within 100 days. So it will be in your first budget. The cost is anything from £50 billion to £70 billion. The biggest tax cut effectively ever in British tax history. I mean, when I say that the IFS almost laugh this policy out of the park, I can almost hear the chuckles. Now, how are you going to pay for that?
Well, we've laid out already places where we would find spending, so we would save roughly around £30 billion a year from scrapping net zero alone. That's before you then start talking about the Quangles, DEI systems, and other things that are there. So, well, the £30 billion is a figure that comes per year. So that £30 billion is there if you scrap net zero. But the point I'm making, Bernard, I think you just outlined why this policy is so. Look, it's why people are so receptive to Reform UK. You're right, it would be a huge tax cut, but it's also a massive tax cut for those people who are on the lower wages in our country, people who are really, really struggling.
But the
I think that is a transformational policy.
The IFS say it's not properly costed. For example, one of the things that you say is that you're going to have a war on waste, and that the war on waste will deliver £50 billion. That is effectively cutting back the number of civil servants in the public sector. And yet, when you actually look at the costings, it just says, root out waste, £50 billion. That's not how politics works.
No, but you're talking about an election in 2029, Bernard. All of this will be costed in a manifesto. You're judging policies on numbers that we're giving you. You're asking for numbers, we give you numbers, and then you're arguing back about the numbers.
No. I'm saying that there's a menu with prices, but
Bernard,
it doesn't actually. You're not telling us how you get to the 50 billion.
You're making the argument for reform sound very, very appealing to many people in Scotland. We're going to cut taxes by getting rid of civil servants who have been there for years. We're going to cut taxes by making sure that we scrap net zero. This is the point. Reform UK as a system is there to try and transform the system inside how old minds have fought in Whitehall. But this is a 2029 issue. At that point, when there's an election, all of this will be costed out. All of this will be there for people to see and to scrutinise. But I think that the party has a manifesto pledge that is going forward. And I think if you ask why the problem that the Scottish Conservatives and the Conservatives as a whole have found themselves in is because they can't articulate what it is that centre-right politics is about. We are certainly doing that, and we're starting a conversation on that.